Hello everyone, my name is Jonathan Greaves. I'm the minister of Monmouth Baptist Church and a schools worker here in Monmouth, and I'm going to share something of the Christian perspective on extremism and the government's approach to it. Christians are followers of Jesus Christ, and we find out about Jesus through the Bible, through our personal friendship with God. Christian faith isn't really about following rules, but actually about a friendship with God that has been mended through what Jesus did on the cross for us. There are four foundational ideas which can help us to understand this broader subject of extremism, which a Christian is likely to draw upon. The first is that we are made in God's image. That means that all of us have an intrinsic value that makes every human being worthy of respect and understanding. The second idea is that we are living in a fallen world, that things have gone wrong. Its roots lie in the fact that we have a broken friendship with God, we try to live without regarding his ways, and it also makes it difficult for us to get on with each other. That's why people fall out and why there is violence and extremism and some of these other things. The Bible explains this really clearly. It also tells us that God has done something about that, so he sent Jesus, who mends our broken friendship with God on the cross, and he teaches us to live in a different way towards each other, particularly drawing on the importance of forgiveness. The fourth thing is that God doesn't force himself upon us, but he invites us to respond to him, to receive his forgiveness, to belong to his family. And Christians who've responded to that same invitation are very enthusiastic to share that with others, which is why Christians are usually keen to talk about their faith. But at the same time, they're also respectful to those who don't want to accept that same invitation. So God's own example is a pattern for creating the idea of tolerance and respect. Now, from a Christian point of view, we would acknowledge that the government has a very difficult job to try to deal with violent extremism. And this is the first place where actually the government seems to have got things wrong, because there is a difference between extremism and violent extremism. So Christians would want to recognize that there are many people across the ages who have been called extremists, and their extremist views are actually good. People like Martin Luther King, for example. He is someone who was called an extremist. Lord Shaftesbury, who ended child slavery and cared for the poor in London, another so-called extremist. Gandhi was called an extremist, and so on. So there are many people across the ages who have actually been good extremists. And the government doesn't seem to have distinguished between good extremists or even extremism itself and those who use violence to promote their extremist cause. So this is one of the things that I think the Christian faith could help with, is a reminder that most Christians would call themselves extremely committed to Jesus. We're extremists in that sense. Anyone who follows the teaching of Jesus and the teaching of the Bible is not going to be a violent extremist. In fact, Jesus prohibits the use of violence to promote the Christian faith. So one of the first things that the Christian faith wants to ask the government is, do you really mean extremists? When in fact there are a lot of people who have done good in history and who are doing good today who would have extreme views, which is actually the motivation for making a difference in the world for good. The second thing that the Christian faith can bring to this subject of extremism that would be helpful is a clear understanding of the role of government. It's easy to legislate about actions, and it's much more difficult to legislate for thoughts or attitudes or even ideas. The Bible says that the role of government is to reward those who do good and to punish those who do wrong. And it would seem a much more straightforward and easier process if the government had focused on actually legislating for violent action rather than trying to deal with thought and intent and those sorts of things, which are extremely difficult to monitor. The third thing that I think is particularly distinctive for the Christian faith and my own tradition, the Baptist tradition, if it wasn't for the early Baptists, we wouldn't have the kind of freedoms, particularly freedom of speech and religion, that we experience today, is that the first Baptists understood from the Bible that tolerance actually means, tolerance and respect, it means that you actually disagree with the other person, you respect them. And in particular, you respect them because they're made in God's image, as I mentioned earlier. But at the same time, ideas that people have are not always good. And that, while it's not the government's place to tell us what ideas we ought to have, we can, in our society, challenge ideas and respect people. And I think this is something that Jesus particularly brings into this. He was regularly challenging ideas that he believed were wrong and deeply respecting and loving people who he disagreed with. And this is something which is characteristic of the Christian faith, which we need to return to. Instead of trying to no platform people, why not have a better idea? So thanks for listening and the opportunity to share with you. If you'd like to know more detail, I'd be very happy. Just get in touch and I'll see what I can do to help.